something came up recently in our class. That's on every AP exam. It's a fascinating way to understand population patterns. Um, and we're going to need to use this terminology throughout the next week or two. So I wanted to explain the demographic transition model. You can pause to draw this. You'll need the basic shape. I'll be adding notes on top of that. So you'll make something like this. And then you'll add some other stuff like this. So you may want to pause just to draw this part. And stage 5 can mean different things. So I'm not sure that you'll need that part. But 1, 2, 3, 4 is important. So what we have happening here is we're tracking birth rate and death rate. You can see in this image that the death rate is green and the birth rate is yellow. And then we're tracking total population. So as a nation develops, what happens to birth rate, death rate, and population? You'll have to break that out in each of these stages. Stage 1 is a situation where both birth rate and death rate are high. People have a ton of babies, and most of those babies die. We have very low life expectancy, and there's really no country like this left on Earth. We call this pre-industrial. But if you want to see this, hunter-gatherer societies in the wild look a lot like stage 1. You may have heard like third world used to describe a country that's sort of like that. Really high mortality, a lot of starvation, limited access to water, no sanitation. But you have to be very, very careful. We all know what you mean when you say that term, but it is a wrong terminology. First, second, and third world describe other things. So be very careful. The College Board would never accept those terms, and they are inaccurate for this discussion. We know it when we hear it because it's misused all the time. News and politics and everybody gets this wrong. So please don't say first, second, third world. Stage 1 country, or you could say a pre-development country, a PDC, pre-development country. Stage 2 is the period of time in a nation's history when death rate starts to drop. And it's pretty easy to do that. We call that early development. And if you want to understand those social factors, just imagine keeping people alive. Food, water, sanitation. This is what you would do at a refugee camp. And I hate to trivialize this, but keeping people alive is so cheap. You could like drive through a refugee camp and like throw Doritos and bottled water out the window and you save lives. It's that easy, really. I'm not trying to be a jerk, and this is not supposed to be cavalier. It's just that lowering death rates is relatively simple. That's why there are very few countries, there are no countries in stage 1, because it's just a humanitarian crisis that's very easily avoided. Stage 2 is lowering death rates, and I need you to have this in your notes that is easy. Death rates are plastic, we say. Of course, if you're still having a lot of babies, but now fewer and fewer of them are dying, your population will grow, right? And you'll have older people reaching old age, you'll have more young people reaching reproductive age, and so population growth will actually accelerate. At one point, population growth will get so steep because you have more of the babies surviving, more breeders making more babies, more older age people and more elderly people all being added at the same time. That's usually the end of stage 2. That's the steepest part of population growth before birth rates start to fall down. That's called stage 3. Stage 3 is, trust me, we're going to come back a lot to stage 3. That'll be a big deal in our notes to follow. Stage 3 is the part in a society's story where birth rates start to fall. And lowering birth rates is difficult. Keep in mind, you're almost guaranteed to have the same number of children as your parents did. Birth rates are cultural. Write that in your notes, double underline, circle it, exclamation mark. Think what I mean by that. Attitudes toward women, attitudes toward family planning, religious conflict, tradition, just plain old, like you just want to have a house that resembles the house where you grew up. And so if you grew up in a house with 12 kids, you'll probably just think that's what family's supposed to feel like, and you'll probably have close to 12 kids. Birth rates are not plastic, they are sticky. So lowering birth rates is difficult because you have to change culture. And maybe you've noticed that's slow. There's always somebody yelling loudly to preserve outdated culture. Culture doesn't change quickly, and you don't just get to decide. You can't just throw money at that and change cultures. Lowering birth rates is part of a big societal shift where people have different opportunities, so they delay the age of first childbearing. Write that down, that's a big deal. Delay the age of first childbearing. The economy might change so that now women are included, and when a woman has a potential to be independent, she may make different decisions than she would have when she was dependent on another person. With more law and order, more trade relationships, rising educational standards, rising access to medicine in general, and family planning in particular, you can eventually bring down birth rates. I need to emphasize that that is difficult. It's not guaranteed. But if you pull that off, then population will stop growing because you're not having as many babies anymore. So eventually you get to what's called stage 4. And this is when birth and death rates are both low. And if they're both low, right, 2% and 2%, then population will stabilize. So we call that low stationary. Stage 4 is welcome to the club. You're now a modern economy. And like I said at the beginning, stage 5 can mean different things. It's just what happens after a demographic transition. And technically, you can see that there's question marks on this diagram, right? You could see them going down. You can actually see populations going up. All the variables can go up in the air. So we're going to skip stage 5 for now. One way to review this, you may want the following screenshot. You can see that everything is the same as I've already said. There are some examples here. There are birth rates written down, death rates written down, what happens to population here. Ways to change birth and death rate at the bottom of this screen. And I have to tell you, I'll be adding more. So you may want a screenshot that you can write on later or something, I don't know, but I'm going to change the slide. This is the same information again. You'll notice stage 5 looks different than the others because like I told you, stage 5 can go both ways. We're not really going to get into stage 5. But notice those age structures down there. You can see that in stage 1 countries, you've got a ton of babies that just don't make it very far. That's called high infant mortality. You also have a short life expectancy. Even though you have a ton of babies, not many of them make it to 5, and then not many of them make it to 10, and then very few of them make it to the teens. And so you have this rapid taper at the bottom, which means you don't have good chances of living long. Average life expectancy might be 30 years, 35, maybe 40 in a population like this. In stage 2, we just fix the death part. And you can imagine that that's going to really affect age structure because now more of those babies will make it. So instead of the babies dropping off pretty fast, you start to get a shape that's more triangular. And it also gets taller because you might have some people reaching 50, 60, 70, 80. And in stage 2, you have what we call very rapid increase. Essentially, everybody at this moment is going to add to the population as they get older and older and older. In stage 3, you're starting to lower birth rates, and so you're starting to stabilize the population. You can imagine that women are having fewer children per woman, and so you're starting to approach what we call replacement fertility. In stage 4, basically everybody makes it to old age, but population isn't growing because most people are having just 2 children per couple as an average. So stage 4 is kind of a stable / pickle shape. And I'm sorry, but a lot of people call it a pickle because you have these little bumps along the edges sometimes. Pickle shape, you'll see why later. You may want the following page also for your notes. Stage 1, high birth rate, high death rate, tons of babies that don't last very long. There's a short life expectancy. You should also add on this slide, I forgot, high infant mortality. So if you look around, you're going to see mostly kids with some adults. There are few older people and almost no elderly people. Population size is generally stable because both are high. There's a ton of people being born, but a ton of people dying. Birth and death rate are both high, so population tends to stay kind of flat. In stage 2, we lower the death rate. So now there's more people living longer. More of the infants make it to 5, and more of the 5-year-olds make it to their teens. So generally you see the puffing out of the age structure. Population grows faster and then faster and then faster because you have more people starting to breed, and then more of those people still having more babies, plus more people reaching middle age, plus more people reaching old age. So population growth accelerates rapidly in stage 2. In stage 3, you have declining birth rate, all coming down to meet an already low death rate, which means people are having less babies. That's what declining birth rate means. People are having less babies. And so you start to bring in that curve at the bottom. Population growth starts to slow down in fertility terms. It's still positive because you have more and more people living to old age, but less positive. So instead of population growth at 10%, you start bringing it down to 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2%, slowing down population growth. And in stage 4, you've reached both low birth and low death rates. It's what we call replacement level fertility. That should be underlined on this slide, I'm sorry. And so you have high survivorship, long life expectancy. Populations are generally stable here. And this is the world that you're used to. This is not a foreign world. This is what you understand. This is your country. Now remember that stage 5 depends. Whatever. I don't think I've ever seen it on an AP test, or if it was, it wasn't a big deal. The question is what happens to birth rates? In case you want to know, does a very developed nation spend more time in economic activity and lower birth rates? Post-development, do death rates rise because people hoard all the wealth and then there's more people falling through the safety net? And so you could see every possibility. This is not a definitive stage. A few things I need to add to your notes on the side. So get ready to go back through them. I need to add some details now. First of all, stage 1 countries, there's no current example. If I want to show you an age structure, I'll have to go back in history. Don't call them first, second, third world countries. That is common and we all understand you, but it's technically wrong. It's outdated. Remember that lowering death rates is easy. It's cheap. It's elastic. Water, food, sanitation, these are the basic human needs. And this is called early development. Whereas lowering birth rates is tough. That's called later development. Birth rates are cultural, and culture is sticky. We're going to talk about this more later. You have to really transform a whole society. You can't do that fast. Look at my list on the screen. None of this is simple. Once those birth rates drop, we say that you're in the modern world stage 4. Remember that population rises until then, so you have increasing populations. So if you have a long transition, that means a longer period for population growth, and we could have a problem. What happens if population is growing? You've lowered the death rate, population grows, and you can't lower birth rates. What if most of the babies survive, but people still have 10, 11, 12 kids each? Maybe you can't change their religious views. Maybe you can't build the infrastructure. Maybe you have some bad luck. This is where a growing population can grow faster than the economy. Just think about that. I know that I've been babbling for a long time, but this is a big whoop. I've got like a couple slides left and then we'll stop. Imagine that you have rapidly growing population where the economy doesn't grow as fast. In other words, you've got more and more people who, instead of later development, are becoming poorer and poorer. That poverty can roll things backward. You can get rising death rates again. Instead of the curve that went like this and then the other curve that went like this, you have a curve that goes like this and the second one stays flat, so those death rates climb again. Birth rates stay high, death rates lower for a while to raise population, and then due to poverty they come back. That's called a demographic trap. You could just go from a less developed nation to a bigger, less developed nation. This happened. Like Bangladesh was going through development, and then they had these like huge hurricanes that crushed their economy. And so instead of everybody using this economy to build later development, they were planning infrastructure, they were planning universities and medical schools. Instead of all that later development, the hurricane just shut down all the factories, and everybody's like, well, I guess we're back to being poor, and we never got a handle on the birth rate. So the death rates came back up, and Bangladesh just went from being a small, hungry country to a larger, hungry country. It's kind of scary, but we see this happening in a place called Sudan now, where the forecast goes, no real outlook of lowering birth rates anytime soon, and we're worried that the same thing will happen as Bangladesh. Remember that development is good for everybody? This could sound naive, but poverty is really not good. There's like no way where poverty is a good thing. A developed country can specialize in something and everybody else benefits. That's basically all of economic history. We want nations to develop. Look at these reasons. First of all, it's just a moral thing. Less suffering has to be good, right? That's ethical behavior. Number two, more happy cultures means more art and more music and more food and more inventions and more geniuses, and that's nice. Economically, this is good because those are more people to buy your American things, and those are more companies to sell you interesting things. And strategically, this is smart too, because rich men don't fight no wars. If you want to recruit new terrorists, you don't go to Wall Street. If you want to recruit terrorists, you go where everybody's frustrated and hungry. We'll talk about the youth bulge later. And sustainability is simpler when population is stable. So we want development, but development is a really tricky thing to define. Some guy named Willy Brandt took all the countries on Earth and just said, who's above average and who's below average in terms of GDP, in terms of their economy. And in the 1980s, we got this diagram. It's called the Brandt line diagram, and it introduced this thing called the North-South divide. Voila. But this was almost immediately pointless. Some nations were growing fast. They were called the BRIC nations. Some were declining fast. And so we had to invent something better. And this dude named Ul Haq, Mahbub ul Haq, a Pakistani dude, he started to define development more carefully, invented all these cool equations, and he came up with this thing called the Human Development Index. You have to know that. It's a term. It's pretty close to general gross domestic product. You can see that the countries with a high development index tend to be the countries that have more money per person, but there are some major exceptions. And this is a tricky thing to define. Development is still tricky. But age structures are cool. So we're going to use age structures to discuss countries, which is on every AP test when we come back tomorrow. Thanks for watching my slideshow. I'll see you all tomorrow.